Hello and welcome to the penthouse of the spiritual bungalow. Nomen, how are you doing today?
Now with a new kind of gin.
Why don't you tell us about that new kind of gin?
Ford's gin. I don't like it as much as the one I had previously, which
What's it called? I missed that.
Ford's gin.
Ford.
I don't care for it as much as the one I had previously, but
Was it endorsed by the former mayor of Toronto, Rob Ford?
hey, Slight Crack Rocks. If he made his, I don't. I think they probably wouldn't be allowed to sell that if he made a gin.
Yeah, that wouldn't taste good if it tastes anything like that smell that we smelled when we were working at the mall. If that was crack smoke, oh, that was horrible.
Man, talk about having to go for a walk.
Oh, yeah, that was it just well, it doesn't amaze me, but it's because you know there is human nature. There's no ends of depravity, but but that you could regularly ingest that stuff and actually be excited for it.
Well, apparently, like it does other things besides stink. I mean, that's the big thing with marijuana, right? Like it's
Oh, it smells
apparently
so
does
bad.
other things besides smell terrible. My brief experiences with marijuana during my wayward youth
Yeah.
lead me to believe that other people have different experiences. Otherwise, like you wouldn't do that because it wouldn't be fun.
Oh
Um,
man, I only experienced it a few times too, but it's a lot stronger than these boomers who were endorsing it had back in the 60s. Like I thought I was going to die. Like I actually thought I'd lost my ability to voluntarily breathe. So I was like exhausted because I'd also been drinking and so my body was just like, no, this is too much. Going to bed, but my brain, my body wanted to go to bed, but my brain was telling me that if I went to bed, I would stop breathing and then I would die.
I was lucky enough to have friends who were actually quite
Adept.
uh, adept, and not just adept, but actually
Yeah,
like good people
yeah,
in certain respects. And so they would like in the respect that in one of the respects that mattered at the moment, which was to make sure that I didn't do anything stupid. And so they're like, okay, that's enough now. And I'm
yeah.
like, oh, I don't feel anything. You will, don't worry.
Oh, right, yeah.
Kind of. So they kind of kept me from doing anything deeply unenjoyable, but I still didn't enjoy the thing that happened in the first place. So that's I don't know. Um,
News. Let's talk about what's happening in the world as we know it. Um, oh yeah, this is interesting. Some great Kennedy-style Catholicism. Our good friend Archbishop Paliglia has said he's just like, oh well, I'm personally against euthanasia, but I could see how it could be for the common good for the state to legislate it. It's like, no, no, it's no, it's sort of bad, but it's not. I'm in charge of the Pontifical Academy for Life.
the
Yeah, I mean, it's
ministry,
kind of
the
interesting
ministry
how
of life,
like
John.
the
The pyramidal building with the fluorescent lights, the place where there is no darkness. It's the ministry of life. It's right next to the ministry of truth in a building that looks quite very similar. Of
yeah.
course, the Ministry of Truth has been having a field day as well with
Mm,
all these releases of statements and such from the Vatican. So I'm glad that the Ministry of Life could chime in for once rather than just the Ministry of Truth.
Ministry of Truth. What
Um,
about the Ministry of
I
Love?
mean,
I'm kind of
one of my favorite parts of the pontificate was when the chocolate rations for traditionalists actually doubled. They doubled the chocolate rations. They went up from 10 grams to 5 grams, which was very generous.
oh, it doubled as in
We went from being we went from being barely allowed to celebrate to hardly even barely allowed, which is more
More, well, more
more
restrictions.
than what
So
we
it's
were
more.
given
It's more
before. As
something.
we've
Yeah.
been told, it was more. It's okay. You can't have the traditional Latin Mass, but Anglicans who are in complete schism with the church can apparently have their liturgy in St. John Lateran's. So that's a thing that you can do. And okay. I'm a little more sympathetic because, as you know, I'm sympathetic towards monophysites. But coming up, the Patriarch of Alexandria is going to celebrate a Coptic liturgy in St. John Lateran.
Okay.
Yeah, that's in the works, man. He's going to visit. He's going to hang out
So
with
I
Pope
mean,
Francis. I can't
I
imagine
remember.
what they're going to talk about.
So I remember our good friend Michael Lofton was all up in arms and saying, he's like, Taylor Marshall is spreading the lie that Pope Francis allowed an Anglican mass, fake mass, to happen at the Vatican, and apparently it's like, yes, it was a fake mass, and the Anglicans did it, but Pope Francis didn't allow it. That's a lie.
Well, I think that's true. I think it actually happened at a level that was lower.
Sure.
And they called themselves Anglo-Catholics,
Right.
which is what Anglicans do when they want to pretend that they're Catholics but not be Catholics and
Right.
still not join the ordinariate, but they call themselves Anglo-Catholics. And
Yeah.
so they're like the highest of Anglicans. Although the credentials of the bishop who did it apparently not high enough for some Anglicans. Some Anglicans have reacted very been very disappointed with this prelate because he doesn't fit all the criteria of Anglo-Donatism required for the height of high Anglicanism, but the divorced and civilly remarried. Okay,
So
well,
so
yeah.
he has
Again,
like, does he not have enough? Does he not have enough like stripes on his like, or enough like indents in his wingtips shoes?
no, like the highest of high Anglicans get very upset about divorce, which is really funny because that's how the church was started. But anyway, the
Makes no sense.
but the well, you know, anyway, the point is that I don't know what my point was. Oh, it was at a lower level. It was at a lower level that it kind of occurred in the bureaucracy and it, there is this thing called Google, but these are like probably like boomer age Italians running the
Yeah,
show.
I know. Yeah.
So they have like they probably thought they were English Catholics. They have language barriers.
Well, yeah, I remember because they're talking about there was that article by those Italian Jesuits talking about like EWTN and Church Militant as sort of this like refuge of integralism and stuff like that, and it just it just was really a bizarre sort of take on the American church.
Well, I read a little bit online actually, in the comments section of Father Zed's blog, and it was a previous, it was a convert who used to be an Anglican minister and of the Anglo-Catholic variety, and I think about a decade ago he was saying something like that. That they, as Anglicans, a bunch of them had visited St. Peter's Basilica, and they'd been told by someone somewhere that, oh, you like Anglicans can celebrate liturgy at St. Peter's now. That's cool. That's totally good. And they're like, okay, if you say so. And then they went there to try to test it out. And they showed up in the morning, and the sacristan was like, well, private masses are earlier, and you got to sort of sign up. But if you want, like, you can celebrate. There's a mass happening right now. And he said, it was like, we explained that we were Anglican. And then he just sort of gave this weird, embarrassed smile and pointed at the chasubles on the wall, like, hey.
That sounds very plausible.
So and then
like
he was
with
like,
my
and then
experience of Vatican bureaucracy, it seems like that's something that could very easily happen.
the whole group of them sort of apologized and scuttled off because they realized that it was probably like not going to be okay. They probably also didn't want to do the Novus Ordo. I mean, you know, and anyway, and then they were talking to some, I think it was some Monsignor or something, and telling him about this afterwards, and he just started laughing and said, "Oh, he probably just thought you were Catholics from England, like, or some religious order he'd never heard of."
Gosh.
Well, I mean, but
I know, I know,
defense,
I get
they
it,
live
but
in
it's
a
just like,
completely, like, it's a completely different country. It's like, what, like, Anglicans are a thing for people who live in the Anglosphere.
I know, but it's just funny because
But
like,
it's not a like a concept like Henry VIII cutting people's heads off doesn't come up that much if that's not the world that you kind of inhabit.
yeah, yeah, I know. It's just funny though. Like it just seems kind of like the Italians are kind of like the European version of kind of like Americans, with just their ignorance of everything else. Like in I don't know, or maybe yeah,
No. It's
yeah,
just it's just isolated. I think more to Europe. It's
right.
and to be fair to them too, they a good deal of them probably just avoid uh, Anglosphere, as it were, the sort of the English speaking world. They kind of just avoid Anglosphere stuff because it's so infectious and it kind of ruins everything
Yeah,
everywhere
that's true.
else.
Actually, yeah, they are very sort of like self-preserving in that sort of capacity. Yeah, yeah, I could see that because it is just so prevalent, and so that you're trying to kind of intentionally kind of go the other direction, especially since they're, so much of, so much of Italians survival is like kind of like having like a viable sort of tourist industry and having a their arts and culture. Anyways, let's see. Oh, this is always one of my favorite spicy topics when this comes up. It is that the bishops uh, in Florida are condemning Florida's dropping a unanimous jury requirement for the death penalty cases. So like this case cited um, was this person Nicholas Cruz, who killed 17 people out of high school, and the jury voted 9-3 in favor of the death penalty. And so he wasn't given the death penalty because of the 3 jury votes against it. But yeah, but so and then there's another one where it was an 8-1 um, non-death penalty sort of vote. But the the bishops are trying to uphold sort of the inadmissible line and saying this is an attack on the inviolability and the dignity of the person. But it wasn't like the
Wait,
attack on
they
the high
have
school students.
no. So wait, so they have political opinions now? Like they
Yeah, I
have a
know.
say
That's kind of,
in the
yeah.
public
It's
sphere? That's very interesting. When did that
yes.
start?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Which seems like a weird saying because if you have cake, the whole point of having it is to eat it. But that like the cake continues in existence while the consumption of the cake is occurring. That's the meaning of this the
Yeah, of
story,
course. Yeah.
the stupid saying. And so you can't tell people we can't tell people how to vote and don't do that. Like
Yeah.
these are two different. Like pick a lane. Pick a lane. Are you? No, I'm serious.
Well,
Are
I know,
you?
but
Are you
they're obviously not going
Americanists?
to.
Like, are you Americanists or are you actually like Catholics? Are you going to be Catholic bishops? Are you going to be Americanist bishops? Please
They're going to be
pick
Democrat
one.
bishops.
Well, it doesn't even matter which party. This as long
Well,
as
no,
like
it does
no
because
no no
they
like
they
okay
follow the they'll be
both parties both
integralists when it comes to Democrat policy, and then they'll be Americanists when it comes to issues like this.
Well, yeah, both parties are hot garbage, but it is just sort of like this fakey fake thing where they're like, oh no, my
Well, yeah, but it's like with like
Catholicism.
Paglia, he's taking the Americanist approach with like with the euthanasia. But if it's like but if it was about you know the Italian state like withdrawing funds from youth shelters, you'd be like with that like that try and promote um socialist agendas, they'd be like, oh no, this is social evil of the highest caliber.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I mean that's the
Yeah.
classic. That's the classic maneuver. That's sort of like, oh no, I'm not brave enough for politics. Kind of nonsense. Obi-Wan Kenobi over here. I need more martini.
Okay.
Talk some noises.
I'm going to talk noises just into my head. So one of the things that Nomen and I have talked about before is just how the really like there can't be like we're actually kind of against the death penalty, but it's just because we actually have such like the church claims, well, not the church, but like sort of the ecclesial authorities claim that there's been a development and understanding of human dignity, and that's why the death penalty is developed, or the teaching on the death penalty. But it's inadmissible in our time because we just have such like a depraved understanding of human dignity. We have no capacity for justice, or never mind like the gatekeeper virtues of fortitude and temperance, which are needed before you can actually have justice or prudence. So it makes, yeah. So our statesmen don't really have the capacity to be able to choose over life and death anymore. Even though, like, I mean, this case of this man who killed 17 students, it seems to be sort of like an open and shut need, like an open shut, like case for the death penalty. I mean, like even if people are sort of like morally backwards and retarded, that if it doesn't make sense to just allow this person to rot in jail.
He will rot
When,
in jail. He'll be on death row forever, and then the appeals will take forever to go through.
well,
Like
yeah,
they
because
don't
the
just
current
like they don't
system, yeah,
just do it. They're like
yeah,
they put you in a
yeah,
special section, and then they go, "We're gonna kill you. One day we'll get you." Like
yeah.
when? Whenever? What do you mean
Yeah, so
whenever?
the current system doesn't really make sense to sort of like really sort of have a stake for. And I mean, like the like lethal injection is actually a pretty brutal way to die as well. He's not really
Oh no, I
humane.
would. That would be terrible. They put you in like a room, and they're like Enya playing or some bullshit like
Oh,
that. Like, oh no, that's awful.
yeah.
Like, you know,
Well, that's like I remember I was really disturbed um when they when I watched Christopher Hitchens being waterboarded, and because one of the big things was that they were playing like Mariah Carey, like while they were like doing like the waterboarding, and so like they had these like guys who were wearing like
that's like
hoods and stuff.
really like
Yeah,
that
it
right
was
there
messed
is the
up. Yeah,
problem. That's
yeah, yeah. It was like this really insipid pop music. I don't know if it was like Mariah Carey or something, but it just like really sort of like added to the sense of like surrealness and just like horror. It's sort of like when those pictures of like Guantanamo Bay came out, and there was like, it just was like these guys in like hoods and stuff like that. It's just like, no, this isn't good.
yeah. Well, you shouldn't torture prisoners. That's
What about
you.
Justinian? Justinian claimed that there were legitimate uses of torture.
It's well, that's. I think he's wrong on that. It's not that it's even if it's so I'm not willing to stake a claim that in say ipso it's like wrong
Right.
philosophically, like But I am willing to stake a claim that like chivalry dictates that you shouldn't do that. And once you stoop to the level below chivalry, you're on the way to becoming an animal.
Yeah.
You know, I'm willing to fail the way that Charles V, the great emperor, failed, and had to abdicate because he refused to compromise with Protestantism by signing a treaty.
Hmm.
Because he had taken a knightly vow. I think it was a vow that he would wipe the heresy of Protestantism from the earth, and he couldn't do that and maintain he couldn't maintain the peace of his kingdom, which is another thing that he vows that the sovereign vows to do, is to maintain peace, justice, and order, and that sort of thing in their kingdom. So he abdicated and went to a monastery and died heartbroken, surrounded by a bunch of clocks.
Yeah, I remember that story actually. But what does that have to do with torture?
You shouldn't do it because it's wrong. On the level of like, it's not necessarily wrong on the level of philosophy. I don't know enough to get into that, but I
Sure,
think
yeah.
it's wrong on the level of like chivalry, like the level that you should live at.
Well, I think Justinian's defense of it is since it's not intrinsically evil. He said it could be used for like a just end of like, for instance, extracting information to sort of like to end an attack. To find out like when an attack is going to happen, or to find out the location of captives or that sort of thing. And that's usually when it is used in modern states as well, to sort of extract information. But
Yeah,
it
but
is
it
also
shouldn't.
used by tyrants to sort of like try and break up any potential resistance.
Shouldn't it? Shouldn't. One would hope anyway that the rather than the acquiring of intel through such means, one would hope that someone would prefer um, a mixture of courage and initiative rather than underhanded tactics, that sort of thing, right? It's sort of like the king engaging in clemency of pardon rather than the hard line of justice,
Sure. Yeah.
right? It's because once we start thinking like utilitarians, even when it's permitted, it gets a little gross really fast.
Yeah.
It becomes a kind of ingrained way of especially because of original sin, right? Human beings just tend in a downward path. It's sort of like, have you ever seen a goat climbing a hill?
Like those mountain sheep that like climb
Yeah, so
the
that
Hoover Dam
they
and stuff.
never go up
Yeah.
and straight. They
Yeah.
either go up or they go down, because the minute you try to go straight across, you actually go down.
Mm,
There's no way to climb across a mountain. You
mm,
have to be going, even to be going across the mountain, you have to be trying to go up. So
right.
the minute that a sovereign and a state takes into their hand sort of these like utilitarian calculus methods, that's it's no longer it's not just they don't maintain a status quo, they actually tend to deteriorate.
Yeah. Sure. But I mean, I guess like in sort of in pragmatic terms, if you sort of like captured um, a person on sort of like nigh on sort of the invasion of Constantinople, who had critical information about how the Turks were going to attack, then you would probably endorse like torture to extract that information from him.
Duct tape holds every time.
Yeah.
It's okay, the sun is going away. The um I don't know.
Well, I guess you don't.
You're
The thing
probably
is
going to
like,
die anyway. Do
how
you
is
really want that to be in the book of
well, that's
records of the
true.
things that
Yeah,
you
I guess. But
did?
how
Like,
and how do you
just
know? How do you even know that And how do you know how reliable the information is that you extract
And
from
how
Mercer
helpful the
anyways? Yeah.
information is. Sometimes it's not that
Yeah.
helpful. And it's like, was that really worth it?
Hmm.
Do you really want? Oh, okay. And then the historians are like, yeah, okay, he was kind of brave, but he tortured a guy, and then everyone rolls their eyes. It's terrible. Just,
Yeah.
there
Oh,
needs to be more of that sort of like mixture of elan and then like the trust in God. You know.
sure. So, so uh, one of the big sort of kerfuffles that's going out in sort of the private revelation world was this. Apparently, there's this nun who our friend is talking about, who Pope Benedict appeared to, who said, "I was murdered." And Michael Lofton is very upset by this, but let's see what he has to say.
Was Pope Benedict XVI actually murdered by not only Pope Francis, but also his very own personal secretary, Archbishop Genswein? Stick around to find out because
Oh, yeah, that's correct. So there's some interesting. We can just read these sort of columns. So there's like a mafia group of Cardinal Freemasons, Benedict under house arrest. He actually said that Pope Francis isn't actually the Pope, and that he didn't really resign, and that Gainswine was actually his executioner, and that apparently under this revelation that Pope Francis revealed that he was satanic under the seal of confession, and there's a plot to murder Pope Benedict XVI, and there also was something about a hidden encyclical dogmatizing um, the Mary's Co-Redemptrix, and then
Well, if you're gonna have
yeah,
a fantasy, you might as well get everything
yeah,
into
just
it that you can. Like, just shove it all in there. Like,
we watched his evaluation of this.
was he going to declare another crusade?
I don't
um,
know.
I
That
was
should be in there. That should be in there.
I was shocked.
because what I see is whoever wrote this was deliberately and intentionally trying to maliciously slander specific people and was trying to deliberately deceive people by
But yeah, I don't know why he's so shocked by this. That's kind of the
Not necessarily. You don't understand how crazy people can become
yeah, exactly.
deluded.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, I mean,
But why is he that shocked? I mean, there's so many like weird
there's
private
so many
revelations out
people who
there.
are
Yeah.
just unstable to reality that we have examples of
Oh, I
that
know.
they might just believe this. You know, we don't have to
Oh yeah.
always assume that they're malicious. I think about half the time I at least I assume that people who are behaving in incredibly malicious manners, especially in the public sphere, maybe in the ecclesiastical hierarchy, are just doing it because they're idiots.
Yeah, that's the most charitable way of
Which it's
interpreting
not
this.
just the
Yeah.
most charitable. It has a bit of the glint of Occam's razor about it too. You're like, well, it's probably more likely. I
I'm
mean,
probably really dumb.
probably. I mean, look at Occam.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he was smart enough to be able to like write all that philosophy, but not
Or
smart
you know,
enough
on
to.
like on the not just Occam. Look at what's his name, the that idiot who wrote that historical fan
Idiot.
fiction novel about totally not about Occam, but kind of about Occam. What
What?
was his name? That the Italian guy was it?
Oh, Umberto Eco.
Umberto Eco. Yeah, that gibberish
Yeah.
book where like the Catholic Church burned
Oh, is that in the name of the rose?
destroyed the comedy of Aristotle because they don't comedy is bad. No laughing, only tears. Now
Yeah,
pay
that
us
was
for
in the name of the
indulgences.
rose. Yeah, that was in the name of the rose. Yeah, I think I started reading that
Ah.
actually. Like the prose was actually pretty good. Like, I mean, I think it would be eminently more entertaining than the Da Vinci Code. But it's but yeah, I just was like, nah, this is a waste of time.
I mean, the back of a Cheerios box is eminently more entertaining than the Da Vinci Code.
I haven't tried to. I haven't even never opened it up, so I don't know. But I
It would just be
just
absolutely infuriating. I mean, I don't know.
oh, it'd be. I think it'd be like reading like. I always got the impression that it'd be sort of like reading like sort of like a combination of sort of like a John Grisham novel with that what was that what's that movie with Nicolas Cage with the Masonic stuff. National
Oh,
Treasure. Yeah,
the National Treasure.
yeah.
That's a fun movie. That's a
Is it?
fun movie. I there's
You're a
very
Freemason.
few. There's very few
How
movies that
dare
I
you?
like
Like
deeply enjoy, but that one is just like, what's the next clue? It's so stupid. I love it. It's great. It's
well,
trash.
Nicolas Cage does actually have a capacity to make just like this is just like stupid entertaining movies for sure, or be involved in them.
Well, it's the kind of movie that it's got a little more pickup to it than Indiana Jones, and it's the kind of what everyone wants like archaeology to be.
Right.
You have to do something crazy, and then you end up, and then it turns out that like scrolls from the Library of Alexandria, papyrus rolls buried under New England,
Hmm.
and totally not rotten at all.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think this gets us into our main topic, which
Yeah.
was the
I was going to
question
just
of
make that
literature.
transition.
And
Yeah. So.
I was before you start off on your little bit. I did want to make a mention. We were talking about historical fiction.
Hmm.
Um, I just wanted to stake the claim that historical fiction is a really interesting sort of modern genre
Hmm.
because it's you get historical work in antiquity, but you don't really get like historical fiction, like things that are fake. Like a lot of stuff that like probably didn't happen. They try to pass off as real history in some of
Hmm.
these texts, but there's like definitely not like historical fiction. There's a kind of embellishment maybe of the story. But something like The Name of the Rose is completely um, it's a vehicle for the it's a bit more like Pilgrim's Progress as a sort of an allegory. It's a vehicle for the opinions of the author. But speaking of things that are not vehicles, don't involve opinions, and the question of authorship is questionable. Please regale us.
Oh yeah. Well, so I mean, we're talking about these genres of literature and film. So I mean, I think video games is kind of one of the most prescient genres for having a lot of historical significance and background, but most people don't know that the highly acclaimed Mario movie actually has quite a robust Catholic background. And so I actually just thought I'd read the plot because it's just I think people need to be familiar with this to sort of really come into to be able to sort of like come to sort of grasp of the deep Catholic heritage here. So
You're
I'll
talking
just
about
oh
are you
I
talking
I'm
about the
talking
current
just
one or
Mario.
the
No,
one?
just Mario. Just
Oh, just Mario.
just,
Okay, okay.
just
Read
Mario.
me
So
that.
yeah, so I read you the synopsis, and then you can see
Okay.
for yourself. So, following the impact of a meteorite into the Earth 65 million years ago, the universe is split into two parallel dimensions. Surviving dinosaurs escape into the new dimension, evolving into a humanoid race and founding the city of Dino Hatton. In 1973, a large egg and a rock are left at a Catholic orphanage. Guys, the Catholic heritage part. And the egg hatches into a human baby girl. 20 years later, Italian American brothers Mario and Luigi Mario. Oh, I didn't realize that Mario was his surname and his first name. See, this is really interesting stuff, getting
The
into the
deep
depths.
lore.
Yeah, deep lore.
It's like reading the Silmarillion.
Yeah. Working as plumbers in Brooklyn, are close to being driven out of business by mafioso Anthony Scapelli's construction company. Oh no, that sounds familiar. Luigi meets Daisy, an NYU archaeology student, who shows him she has been excavating for dinosaur bones under the Brooklyn Bridge. Wow, that would be yeah, an interesting place to look for dinosaur bones. You could find a lot of artifacts under there, I'm sure. Um, there, they witness Scapelli's men sabotaging it by leaving the water pipes open. Wow. Mario and Luigi fix it, but Iggy and Spike, henchmen and cousins of President Koopa, the leader of the other dimension, kidnap Daisy after mistakenly kidnapping other girls, including Mario's girlfriend, Daniela. The brothers pursue them through an interdimensional portal to Dino Hatton, where they lose track of Daisy and the rock, which is stolen by Big Bertha, the bouncer at the Boom Boom Bar. Daisy learns she is descended from dinosaurs and the long lost princess of the other dimension. Her father was overthrown as king by Koopa, and her mother, the queen, was the one who took her to Brooklyn. Iggy and Spike realize that they lost Daisy's rock, which is a meteorite fragment that Koopa needs to merge the worlds. Oh, okay, of course. They believe only Daisy can do so because of her royal heritage. Mario and Luigi escape prison and go to rescue Daisy, aided by Toad, a good natured guitarist who's developed into a Goomba, a semi humanoid dinosaur, as a punishment for a protest. What? Okay,
You don't remember any of this?
no. Okay.
I remember all of this.
All of
I'm
this, yeah.
reliving the film as you
You really-
speak.
Daisy's own escape attempted is aided by Yoshi, a pet of the royal family, and Iggy and Spike, who were mentally evolved to become intelligent and decided to turn on Koopa. Koopa's jealous girlfriend, Lena, tries unsuccessfully to kill Daisy, then obtains the rock with plans to overthrow him, but is literally fossilized when she merges the worlds. In Brooklyn, Koopa attempts his takeover by rousing his army and turning Scapelli into a chimpanzee. But Mario holds him off long enough for the worlds to separate again when Luigi and Daisy remove the fragment from the meteorite. What fragment? Anyways, Mario and Luigi obtain devolution guns and use them to defeat Koopa by devolving him into primeval slime. Daisy's father is restored as a king, and the citizens celebrate and immediately destroy anything with Koopa's likeness. Daisy decides to stay in Dino Hatton and kisses Luigi goodbye as she opens the portal for him and Mario to return to Brooklyn. 3 weeks later, the Mario brothers are hailed as heroes. Daisy arrives at Mario and Luigi's apartment in Brooklyn and asks them to help her on a new mission. Wow. It's a very elaborate plot, but yeah, the Catholic.
I would like to remind you,
That's
Jonathan,
our-
that this
yeah.
is a film beyond the tradition of
The
criticism.
tradition of film.
This is a film beyond anything.
See, I think
you've
one of
ever
the
seen.
one of the things that I missed when we watched this years ago was that I didn't realize that they actually had like somehow evolved into a humanoid race. Like because I think they really briefly mentioned that in like the credits, and so I was like, why do all these dinosaurs look like humans? I was really confused, and why do they have like just like an underground version of New York? But yeah, it's all kind of explained here. I mean,
Cyberpunk New York.
Cyberpunk New York, yeah.
Yeah, it's probably one of the there's a couple of themes I'm picking up. Besides the Catholic nunnery, also the message about monarchy. You know, I really appreciate that.
It's an interesting commentary on evolution too. Like, I mean, I think it does kind of. I think the church would reject that actually because it actually does kind of. It promotes what you may call it when you have like a polygenesis, right? So like the dinosaurs evolved separately into a human species, you know, whereas like humanity generous strictly kind of like upholds sort of like a monogenesis policy. If you do want to have like if you do want to believe in human evolution.
If Teilhard de Chardin had lived long enough to see this film, he would have died in raptures of ecstasy.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, like the idea that devolution gun
is kind of like
it's going like it's bringing everything back to the alpha point. You know,
it's the apotheosis of all his years of thought and work brought into one great film.
Yeah,
we are all Mario.
We are all Mario. Mario.
The Omega Mario.
The Omega point of Mario, where all becomes Mario and all becomes Goomba. I don't. So why is Toad a Goomba? He's supposed to be like a mushroom. It's not. Goombas are those little brown
They
things.
they didn't want to introduce anything else. I think
Wow.
there's a lot going on already.
There's a lot. Yeah. I'll give it to that movie. Yeah. I mean, I'm impressed with the kids who can follow that stuff. Who are all really impressed with this. It's making $1 billion. It's
It's a good film. It deserves it.
yeah. I mean, Mario. Yeah, it's too
This
hard
is
to
really, I mean,
admit.
the problem with this one, of course, you've chosen is that it's outside of all categories of literature. That's part of the problem. It's like a second Epic of Gilgamesh. There's no
Sorry.
way we can really like lock it down in one category. But what I was really hoping to do was we could talk about sort of different modern categories of literature. Last time we had talked about horror and how it sort of is a rarefied version of tragedy
Mm-hmm.
and the consequences that fall from that, what makes good horror, what makes bad horror. And I was hoping we could do something similar for other modern genres that kind of don't fit into the ancient paradigms that we have as we have them.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. You were mentioning talking about kind of the sci-fi and sort of fantasy sort of. I mean, I guess that is kind of a sci-fi plot. The Mario movie. Like, I mean, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, some form of science fiction and fantasy mashed together. Kind of like Star Wars.
Well,
Star Wars is more of like a fantasy movie than a
there's
sci-fi
not much
movie.
of a difference between the two of them actually. Like
No.
especially like the fantasy, the Force is a sort of a fantasy thing.
Yeah.
And then the science fiction usually depends more upon human progress in some sort of technology.
Right.
And then the fantasy sort of is more of a I didn't even know how to define it. It's a kind of mythological.
Well, it has like kind of an
construction.
escapist quality usually. Like, I mean,
Both
kind
of
of.
them do though.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess there's hard science fiction, which tries to sort of like really sort of base itself in a feasible rationality based on sort of what we know about science. I mean, it never is completely sort of like based in sort of reality. It's always speculation, but it tries to be like a purely sort of like rational, speculative future. Those are usually the boring ones, though.
Captain Kirk checking his 401k. I need to retire.
Ah. Yep.
But I think what's going on in both of those genres is a kind of extension of what occurs generally in fiction writing, which is a kind of but it's better in one way. It can also be way worse in the same way. So it's the fantasy and science fiction both present
well, there's world building, right? They're trying to create sort of like an
yeah,
alternate world or an
but
alternate
it's not an
reality.
alternate world. It's a symbolic world. So it just kind of it's a kind of sort of a rarefied version of reality where you try and work through like concepts and problems, right? You get that in Tolkien, who's of course the master of fantasy. Like,
yeah,
and Tolkien derives that from the not from tragedy and comedy, which are Greek conventions, but from the sort of the epic cycles that come before tragedy and comedy are really nailed out. You get tragedy and comedy within the epic cycles, and in the Northern European epic cycles, you don't get a sort of you don't get this period of rarefication that actually like sort of draws out the elements. You get these very interesting literary pieces.
Well, yeah, he was trying to create sort of a his own sort of mythology, sort of like like an extended sort of English mythology, because
Sort of. I mean,
yeah,
Tolkien is like pan-European because,
yeah,
I mean, for example, the part where Gandalf comes riding in on giant eagles, that's straight out of the Walthurius, which is a early medieval epic poem, and at the end of the, it involves some fighting against Attila the Hun, and at the end, the protagonists are rescued by Virgil, the necromancer and magician, who also just so
oh wow,
happens to
that's
be
cool.
yeah, Virgil comes flying in on giant eagle and rescues them. He has quite the literary afterlife in medieval Europe.
Yeah, I sure did. Yeah,
And
with Dante,
you see the
obviously, is the
culmination of
famous.
that in
Yeah,
Dante, right?
yeah.
But he kind of appears as this kind of like, he has powers of like a wizard. And so Gandalf's character is somewhat drawn actually from a mixture of Merlin, I think, and Virgil.
Yeah, that's cool. The so what other genres have this kind of this world building aspect then? I mean, because it seems like the ancients, like, really did believe that these things existed. Like, I mean, at least reading um, Augustine, he really did believe that there were sort of the one-footed people who hopped around in sort of like the southern areas of Africa, and that at the end at the Antipodes there was people with the backwards feet, and so they have that because you have this because fantasy and science fiction is modern in the sense that it sort of like it's after it take this always written after kind of the disenchantment of the world where you believe that these things can't actually happen,
It's
but
true. It's
yeah.
true. I mean, I think you get a little bit of a foretaste with it. It's not really fantasy, but the Irish historically are full of it, and they kind of revel in that in the Middle Ages. So
Hmm.
I think that there's a bit of an origin point there that the Irish don't really believe these kinds of stories, and I doubt anyone really took the Walthurius seriously. It's full of so many anachronisms that you would never really.
But when did that
You might.
but when did that disenfranchisement actually happen? Like, it's funny because you still have town villages um in Norway, where people are convinced that trolls actually exist and that they've seen them in the forest and this sort of thing.
Well, you do
But
have a series of novels that come out of Hellenistic Alexandria that are clearly made up.
Interesting, yeah.
Completely made up plots. We only have a few of them actually, so they don't. As a movement, it doesn't survive for very
Right.
long. But there's even a sort of a science fiction one where they go to the moon and they meet aliens and stuff. So
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Like, do you know anything more about that?
not really. No, I
Not
haven't
really.
read it
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
Of books there is no end.
I mean, I guess Dante's kind of like a science fiction as well, since he's sort of like at in the Paradiso he goes to sort of the planets, which are where the occupants are the souls of the blessed.
I once had this dream
Hmm.
where Virgil took me to the asteroid where they keep false prophets. Yeah, it was very interesting. In the dream, this is not commentary, but in the dream, in the dream, I think Tom Cruise was there in a toga with sunglasses, and I remember also that in the dream very vaguely that Mel Gibson was there in the Braveheart makeup, but I think also the toga. And everyone was wearing togas on the thing. And
Okay.
there was this enormous throne with the god Neptune on it. And he was tied up and he had a gag on his mouth and he was just glaring at me.
Huh?
It was an odd dream.
Yeah, that is an odd dream.
Yeah, that happened.
On just this
In a
asteroid.
It's where they kept the false messiahs.
Yeah.
Virgil was taking me there to teach me something I don't remember.
That's really funny. Yeah, but the it's yeah, it's interesting when you try and like when you try and really engage with sort of like ancient literature because you are sort of like kind of like left to sort of kind of wondering like whether or not they actually believe this because we have like sources um of bishops of like correspondence between missionaries going to Scandinavia uh and their bishop where he says, oh, what should I do if I meet the dog-headed people? And the bishop instructed him, it's like, well, if they can speak and you're able to communicate with them, that means they have a rational soul and they should be baptized and instructed in the faith, and just it seems to be like in complete earnestness, and dogheads seem to be very sort of popular in certain areas of Europe, because they're actually, you know, put on the facades of cathedrals and they're showing like, kind of building stuff and that sort of thing. So, yeah, but yeah, it is interesting. I mean, like that was like kind of that famous interchange with like Marco Polo when he met the I don't know if it was the Chinese, but it was an Oriental culture, and he said, "Oh, so like where are the people with the faces in their chests and mouths on their stomachs?" And he said, "It was like, oh, well, we thought that they came from where you're from, and
That might have,
yeah,
in their defense, that might have been the Chinese pulling his leg because they did that a lot.
yeah,
Um,
right, yeah,
which, I mean,
yeah,
more power to you, because
oh yeah,
when a
that's
guy
great,
who hasn't bathed for a long time shows up, like, can you go away?
yeah,
That he's smelly and he talks funny, and he stole all of our pasta. That
yeah,
we have more. I don't know what I'm so excited about. The I think one of the interesting things that occurs in history is that the way that history gets written in the late Roman Empire, it tends to be a little on the aggressive side. And then as the Roman Empire falls, history as a discipline seems to turn into a sort of chronological accounting rather than controversial history. And controversial history doesn't really show up again until the Renaissance.
right,
Because history, I mean, part of it in the Middle Ages is you like, I have the right to this by my ancestry. And then the other guy would just stab you and like, well, I'm in charge now. And I have the right to that because of my ancestry. And most people were like, that's fine. I'll take it. That's kind of what happened when Henry VII came over to rule England.
hmm.
He was in exile and he came back, and he's only vaguely related to the House of Lancaster. And Richard III, everyone hated him. And so when he killed Richard III, he's like, I'm king. Everyone said, you go for it. There were very few rebellions. They were a bit of a pain, but there were a few small pockets of rebellion amongst the different barons who were eventually like captured and killed. And they but for the most part, everyone was like, looked at his genealogy and was like, it's fine. And there were candidates, I think, who were still alive who were much better claims, but none of them actually bothered to.
Well, yeah, I mean that happened in the with the lineage of the Roman emperors again and again as well,
Yeah,
but it was
there's a bit of a
yeah,
pragmatic thing there. But in the early modern period of what we call it Renaissance, basically, is history becomes controversial. You have like Lorenzo Valla questioning the donation of Constantine. That sort of thing. So people start examining documents. They start saying like, hey, no, they start writing controversial history. And when the Protestant Reformation occurs, it explodes because both sides start writing history like there's no tomorrow. And because often it looked like there wasn't going to be one. And history becomes one of the litmus tests and one of the strong litmus tests for proof of legitimacy. And you see that, and that carries on to the modern period. And so we're very like Nomen says, right? One who ceases to be deep in history ceases to be Protestant. And He read the documents of the Council of Nicaea and all the Arian controversy and went, "I think I'm in the wrong building," and that's kind of where the history is now, and it's inextricably there in most cases. It proves a sort of legitimacy.
Yeah, but I guess sort of. So where is the impetus then for fiction? Because I think that actually sort of sort of our tangent into history and the nature of history sort of is a good sort of tangential point to sort of fiction, because fiction is intentionally not historical. Or
Well,
I mean, yeah,
history tends to be now, especially.
yeah,
So this is going to tie back into the bit with disenchantment, but history, historically, often illustrative of morals, like Plutarch.
sure,
Plutarch's lives are biographies for the sake of morals, and they may or may not be that accurate. But to his defense, he provides like a lot of different accounts in the text, so that's not entirely fair. He leaves it to the reader to choose which one he thinks is the most viable. But we are very picky about history these days. Like it has to all make sense. It has to all line up, and we're argue over details, and we want it to be as accurate as possible. So the place, once history takes that controversial aspect, the place where you really try to illustrate morality, starting in the Renaissance, is in the allegory.
yeah,
In
interesting.
allegorical fiction, and so that you get something like Pilgrim's Progress by Bunyan. You get something like the journey. What is it? Is it the Journey to Abyssinia or the Prince of Abyssinia by Samuel Johnson? It's an allegorical Eastern fable. You get a number of other ones as well that I can't remember the name of. Gulliver's Travels is one of the famous satires that is a deeply sort of deeply in that vein. Don't forget the very famous one, the very often misinterpreted one, Thomas More's Utopia, is a fictional work. It's about a fictional place. It's a fictional dialogue about a fictional place.
Yeah.
With fictional character that's an interlocutor in the dialogue.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Right. So these fake things get produced to try to
replace
what sort of like historical tragedy and stuff would often do as well, which is you create this sort of like allegorical symbolic world through which you can kind of like rarefy various human passions and expose them for what they are. This occurs also in late antiquity, at the time when history was quite controversial. Lucian, for example, in his dialogues, is often pulling people's legs and exaggerating, and perhaps not being as accurate as he could be. But he's trying to make fun. Satire is, of course, trying to rarefy various things. And then
he's a Roman historian, correct?
No, Lucian is a Roman. He's a Roman writer. He writes a lot of satires, like the Dialogues of the Dead. He goes after Christians. He goes after Stoics. He goes after pagans. He goes after everyone.
Was he contemporaries with Juvenal?
No, Lucian is
later.
Much later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Dating. I'd say he's almost contemporary with he's around the time of Plutarch, actually. I think in the 200s. Like Christianity's made a fair bit of inroads.
Oh, okay.
By the time he's kind of making fun of them and everyone else. But these sort of categories seem to sort of fade into obscurity, I think, in the Middle Ages. You do get these sort of collections of stories that are supposed to be kind of funny and illustrative and stuff in the Middle Ages, but it's a bit of literarily, it's a bit of a different scene. but in the Renaissance and the sort of modernity, I think part of what happens with what evolves into this kind of disillusionment is kind of is in general the way things go. But bad fantasy is escapist. Good fantasy is revealing of the human, like philosophical, right?
But is there any good fantasy besides Tolkien? I have yet to come across it.
I'm sure it's somewhere.
Somewhere.
Some people like C.S. Lewis's bits. I don't know. It's not for me. But
Yeah. I just think it's all sort of, most of it is for people who just kind
escapist.
of,
Most of it
yeah,
is escapist.
it
It's
is
part of the
escapist. Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
I mean, it's leaning into horror, but like H.P. Lovecraft, I find isn't too bad. I think at rarefying those kinds of things, because it's often not terrifying. It's just sort of fantastical. But
Yeah. Well, I guess one sort of like famous work of fiction um, that we haven't sort of mentioned from a time or two was like Don Quixote, right? Which does clearly sort of promotes a place of sort of making sort of like a moral point, and I guess Chaucer too. The Canterbury Tales are clearly supposed to be fictional accounts of people who could have been sort of like real people. That's kind of like a historical um, fiction where the characters sort of represent um, uh, failings or sort of virtues.
there's something
And
a bit
yeah.
sort of there's something a bit like Lucian like about Chaucer. Actually,
Hmm. Yeah.
it's very tongue in cheek the whole time.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, he retracted a lot of those stories from the Canterbury Tales later on his deathbed. I mean, there was like, but it's kind of funny though. Like, I mean, 'cause none of them are like that bad. I mean, there is like blasphemy and stuff in those stories,
Yeah,
but
it's
yeah,
often with it. It's sort of like
yeah,
Erasmus, where he kind of he never not publishes this stuff, but he does kind of have his regrets towards the end of his life. He says, "I wouldn't have been so. I would have been still critical, but I wouldn't have worded it quite that way if I had known that like Christendom was going to collapse
right,
shortly within my own lifetime." Right? He was
yeah,
kind of very upset about the Protestant Reformation.
yeah.
Because he has quite biting satire in his in things like his colloquies and
Hmm. That's interesting. But I mean, Dan Brown, he's got this good satire as well, right? It's very biting, insightful
possibly
commentary.
this. I actually read, like, when I was younger, I read the Da Vinci Code.
Oh, you actually read it?
Yeah, I've read the whole thing and I remember most of it. It's possibly the stupidest crap I've ever seen.
I'm actually I'm amazed that you actually got through it.
I was like 16, man.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
But I
Yeah.
can remember it, and it's so dumb.
I guess the message to take away from this though is
check this out, y'all. Read a book, read a book, read a book, read a book.
I mean, reading of books is good as long as they're good books.
maybe not the Da Vinci Code.
Don't
Some of the other
read the Da
books.
Vinci Code. It's not a book. It's really more of like a fuel.
Yeah, it'd probably be decent fuel
Non-renewable
for what it's
resource.
worth. It's just like I've heard people say about that book particularly that he'll try and just describe streets in like Rome, and it's like clearly just not even close to what the street that he's actually talking about actually is. And
It was before Google
yeah,
Street View. You know,
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, you can just look there and yeah.
just make stuff up. Just make it up as you go. That's
Yeah.
sort of that's the thing that you do.
Hmm. Well,
Yes,
been-
indeed. We sure did run out of content. We
We sure
sure did.
okay, so remember to like and subscribe, and join us next week on the Catholic Scallywag.
Remember, you will receive your reward in purgatory.
Indeed.